Hi there, and welcome back to the Gear4music Synth and Tech channel. My name is Rick, and today I'm joined by legendary producer Steve Levine. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
And we're going to go through some home recording tips and tricks. So Steve, what do you think is the most important thing when you're jumping into the world of home recording?
I think before you record anything, get your workstation, your setup, your area ready to go, because you're going to be spending an enormous amount of time staring into a screen. So, I mean, a basic simple trick, you probably noticed if you've seen our other videos, I prefer to use a trackball rather than a mouse or a trackpad. And the reason for that is you'll find that once you start recording, you go down a rabbit hole of editing. You really do. And you can end up really getting quite a lot of carpal tunnel and this can hurt. So the advantage of a trackball, I think, is that it's much better for your, you know, we all have terrible posture. So while we're discussing posture, get a good chair. You know, a chair is really important. But the trackball for me allows not only a more ergonomic way of working, but also you can assign some key commands to these buttons. So, you know, I've got zoom controls on there. So it means your workflow is really good. And then get your space, you know, get the screen at the right height, get everything as you want, make it as comfortable as possible.
Well, yeah, I find with, obviously, when I'm using the trackpad for my Apple, just for everyday kind of things, when I'm using my laptop, it's fine. But when I do start getting into editing, I do find that I get a lot of pain. So that's actually really good.
Yeah, so any type of trackball will work, but it just, I think it's good. And then from time to time, you can go back to a trackpad. In fact, in my studio setup, I have my right hand with this, and I actually do have a trackpad on the left hand, because I find that, for example, when you're scrolling up and down, you can scroll vertically and horizontally with both hands, and you can kind of see where you want to work.
And I think with Apple in particular, just to jump into that as well, the sideways scrolling is literally a game changer. Like, I need that when I'm editing because it just saves me so much time.
Yes, and if a lot of users now are working what we call in the box, they're not using any other equipment. In my studio, I actually still have a mixing console, but a lot of people don't do that. So when you're in that environment and you're just staring into that screen, how you shape your workflow, how you use things is really, really important.
So here we've got everything set up for a recording situation, but obviously the next step obviously would be to actually record it. So we need to think about obviously the actual room itself and comfort, and also the sound and everything.
Well, I always use the example, there's a big difference between home recording and recording at home. Home recording makes it sound like it's a bit cheap and not very good, whereas recording at home, you can record at home to a professional standard. And one of the giveaways, the difference between home recording and recording at home, is the sound of the environment that you're recording in. Most people who are recording at home do not have sound diffusers or any sound treatment, so that is a giveaway. So their vocals, for example, might have that sound of a front room on them, which is not necessarily desirable. So after setting up your workspace, the very next thing I would always advise is check where you're plugging everything in. So if you're working at home, the chances are you may have a fridge or a washing machine. Those are two particular things that will almost certainly cause clicks and pops on your recording, because when they switch on, particularly fridges, they cause a big drawing current. And so I would immediately advise, for your laptop or your computer and all of your interfaces, can you get a spike surge protector plug to plug everything in, just to try and clean up? And if you can go a step further and actually have a small voltage stabilizer. Now, a lot of guitarists do use these. They, you know, when you're traveling around the country, you're not sure of what the venue's going to have. So a lot of guitarists do now have voltage. I mean, Furman, for example, is one particular brand.
Power conditioning.
Power conditioning, because power conditioning makes a huge difference to the audio quality. So power conditioning at the top end, at the low end, a simple surge protector would be important. So once you've got the power up, how can you improve the sound of your room? Now, if you're not fortunate enough to have diffusers, simple things like hanging a duvet from a washing line between the room and where you're going to record. So you're creating a vocal booth. That's a great trick. If you've gone to the second level of this setup, you'll have a reflection filter. Those are fantastic. And you can use the reflection filter not just for your vocals, but also for your acoustic guitar, or indeed your guitar cabinet. A great trick there is to, if you're using a guitar amp and you want to mic it up, put the reflection filter in front of that. And maybe even, same thing, use your duvet to kind of create a slightly deader space, because recording at home, you need to get rid of those reflections. Whereas in a professional recording studio, the rooms are treated and you want to add that in because that's the fingerprint of the studio. But at home, it's much easier to have a cleaner, drier signal. And with all thousands of great plugins or impulse responses, you can create exactly the environment that you want for your vocal or your guitar.
Yeah, I can remember when I was, first starting doing vocal recording, we used to get a mattress and put the mattress up against the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anything to deaden the sound. It's what you don't want are the reflections. And so that's a really great trick. So we've set up our workstation, we've spoken about the power, and we've spoken about treating the room. The next thing is to make sure that in the recording world, particularly if you're doing vocals, make sure you've got plenty of beverages available. It sounds simple, but honestly, when you're singing for a couple of hours, you get very, very dry. And that's a horrible sound.
Yeah.
And so simple things like, herbal tea, water, not fizzy water, those simple things can make a huge difference. I have regular amounts of throat comfort tea available to my singers. It's a tea bag that you can have, and it just simply lines the throat. The singers I work with, they love that. They go and buy it themselves. So throat comfort tea or herbal teas really can help the process. So you're always hydrated, but your mouth itself is there.
Yeah.
If we're going to record guitars, put the guitar strings on maybe a day or so before you want to use it, because putting fresh guitar strings on just before you record, as you know as a guitarist, oh my God,
yes,
constantly out of tune.
Yeah, or realistically just learn how to properly tension the strings. Obviously be careful because you can be quite,
But that's a little trick, isn't it? To make sure that the instrument that you're going to use is fit for the job that it wants to do. I mean, you can leave old strings on if you prefer that sound, but if you are upgrading the sound, certainly on an acoustic guitar, a fresh set of strings, it's like you get 50% more top end. It's just so much good. But put them on a day or so before. I
think it's really just coming back to just having some thought into actually what's coming, and a little bit of preparation goes a long way.
You're absolutely right. It really, really does. And then if you're collaborating with people, try and work out what your best workflow plan is. What's the best time of day for everyone to work? And unfortunately, in the modern world, a lot of young singer-songwriters unfortunately have to have paying jobs because the money that they're earning from recording isn't enough to support them. So try and work your schedule out so that you can be as productive as possible, because there's no point in, if you've got a horrible job and you're absolutely exhausted, you're not going to capture the best performance. So if you're working alone or in collaboration, try and have a look at people's schedule and try and find the optimum time to record. It's really, really important.
And I think obviously with this type of thing, it's great to capture stuff on the fly, but if you are really wanting to record something that you want to release or something that you really want to be proud of, that preparation could also go into like making sure your voice is warmed up and making sure you know your parts, and even warming up your hands if you're going to play guitar parts.
Absolutely. I actually do have a vocal coach that comes to my studio to give vocal lessons to some of my singers. You're absolutely correct. The breathing, the warming up makes a huge difference. Now, on a record that I might be working on, chances are there's going to be some backing vocals. And in the modern way of recording, those backing vocals may be multi-tracked. That can take several hours. That requires a lot of stamina. When someone sings live, for example, they may do a warm-up, go on stage, 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe an hour. They're not going to do a 5-hour set, but to sing for 5 hours in the studio straight is not unusual. That's a massive difference. And so apart from the tea, you're absolutely right, warming up, getting good vocal techniques. There's lots of lessons available online, but actually vocal coaches are not expensive. To have a couple of lessons, many of my professional singers, having had the lessons from my coach, they've hired her individually to just give them some warm-ups, and particularly if they've got a little tour. Even if they're doing coffee shop functions, which might be sort of 2 or 3 sets in a day, having this additional kind of, it's just exercise. It keeps you match fit.
And breathing as well. Like, I mean, it's a huge, for singing in particular, you don't realize how breathing properly is actually going to be able to get you, a better vocal tone, but also just that stamina that you're going to need.
And breathing from the right part of your diaphragm is incredibly important. I had a very specific example on one of the songs I did recently where the singer wasn't getting the note. And I'll give her a name check. Kaya, who's my vocal coach, she stood behind the singer and did almost like a Heimlich maneuver to get her to sing the note. And suddenly it was like, bing! Then there was the note.
And then from there, you learn that obviously in more live performances, that's how you kind of get to those notes, because you can hit that every time.
Well, you don't unlearn it. Once you learn these techniques, they're with you forever. It's just like these recording techniques. Some of this stuff I learned when I first started. It stays with you for your whole recording career.
But do you find that, trial and error and then obviously experimentation, it keeps the job exciting, but it also lets you learn new things and try new things?
I think you're absolutely right there. So the two areas where I think there's great levels of experimentation in home recording is guitar sounds. So we are in a world where there are so many pedals available now, and each pedal offers something unique over the next pedal. How many fuzz distortion pedals do you have? 100. It's never ending because each one is slightly different to the other one.
Yeah.
And that's an area, getting the right distortion or crunch or fuzz or whatever it is. There's one area you can spend a whole day experimenting, but when you get your right tone, that's one of those things between guitarist and sound where the right tone becomes incredibly inspirational.
Yeah.
The same is true with synthesis. Synthesizer technology has moved on, and with the plethora of modular synthesizers that are available, you patch one thing to another or do something with it, and you can create something that's your own signature sound. No one else has that combination because you've done it your way.
Yeah.
And you can come up with something that is absolutely fantastic. Thankfully now, I've learnt my lesson with modular. You can set something up and you can go, that sounds great. I'm just going to have a little lunch break. And you come back and it's completely different. So I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
If I get a sound that I like, I definitely record it. And if it's something I really, really love, I might sample it so that I've got it for future use, because you change one tiny thing on a modular synth and it's gone forever. Yeah. But it is absolutely still for me something that really is exciting, because you can get a tone and you go, wow, I can write a song or work something out that's really different. So experimenting at home is really, really valuable, because you do have, I hate to say it, a little more unlimited time. Whereas if you're in a professional recording studio with the clock ticking, you can't.
It's quite a bit more expensive that way.
A lot more expensive.
I think with experimentation as well, you might read something on the internet or see something on the internet that tells you how to do something a specific way. But I think that there's no cut and dry exact way to do things. If you, like say for instance, for drum overheads, they might look completely wrong. But if you're getting the right sound, you need to use your ears. I think that's the important thing.
Drum recording is, there's certain points of a recording process that the same problems are always the same. So, and then this has not changed over the years. So miking up a drum kit is problem number one. Yeah. Overdubbing the rest of the band, problem number two. Vocal recording number three. And then, of course, we'll probably get on to mixing. Yeah. But let's start with at the very beginning then. Let's start with the drum track. I learned a huge lesson when I first started recording in Los Angeles. Los Angeles recording studios are incredibly expensive, and the session drummers tend to do multiple sessions throughout the day at different studios. So they have 2 to 3 drum kits, but they have a drum tech, and the drum tech turns up at the studio, say Studio 1 in the morning, sets kit 1 up, tunes it for said drummer turns up, is ready to record in 10 minutes, then leaves and goes to Studio 2. The thing that the drum tech taught me was the importance of preparation of the drum. This is before you put any microphones on the kit at all. So what the drum techs do in California is they will tune the kit to the room, which is incredibly important, have a conversation with the producer or the arranger about the songs you're doing, and in some cases, tune the kit specifically to the song that is going to be recorded. And I mean the toms, for example. Yeah. It's a simple thing, but tuning the toms to the pitch of the track makes a massive difference. Again, before I've put a single microphone in front. Yeah. Then you have to go back to the beginning of recorded time. When you look at vintage recording techniques, they were only able to use 1 or 2 mics on a drum kit. So stand in front of the kit, listen to it. Hopefully the drummer doesn't play too loud, but listen to how it sounds. Listen to how you want the stereo of the drums to be, and then decide what microphones work best. So obviously a kick mic of some sort. If you've got the ability to have a sub kick as well, that's fantastic. So for me, when I mic a drum kit up, I put a mic inside the drum, and if I have a front skin on it, then it'll be put in before the skin is on, and then the cable will just come out through the vent. But whether you have a skin or not is a musical decision, because it does sound very, very different. So with some of my indie bands, we will have the skin on the front, and we want that more floppy sound. For some of the more kind of neo-soul, disco, funk things, you don't want the skin, you want a much tighter sound. And for the jazz things, a hybrid. You know, some jazz tracks I prefer to have an open drum, some I have a skin on the front but with a skin rim. So that's where there's an element of front skin, but the whole is sort of fairly small.
Okay.
And I use one of those dampeners on the front. So you get that jazz sound. So the front skin is rattling.
Yeah.
I will then have a microphone on the beta side, and normally a very, very small condenser, and I'll have a sub kick. So it's 3 on the kick drum. Bearing in mind you need to check the phase of those microphones because they're all different. Snare drum, top mic and a bottom mic. Absolutely fantastic. I've recently discovered the Loudon Audio snare drum mic for the top.
Yes,
Game
I've
changer.
not actually had a chance to try one, but I really want to.
It is a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, traditionally one would use a Shure SM57 or something similar in combination with something else. Because remember that if you use an SM57 style mic, you're not going to get the super high end. So depending on the type of music you're doing, you might want a higher fidelity mic.
Yeah.
So something on the top, something on the bottom. Again, discuss it with the drummer. Find a position that works for you as an engineer, but also works for them as a drummer because you don't want them to hit the mic.
Yeah.
Tom's debatable. I mean, there's so many different ways. You can have just, as you said, a pair above and you can capture or you can have some close condensers on each one. That's really, again, a sonic choice. So if you want the toms panning across the stereo image, you need a closer mic to get the positions. If you're in a more indie kind of floppy way, then maybe you don't need them. Maybe just the room mics or an overhead mic will capture that. And a hi-hat mic is useful.
Yeah.
On jazz, which I've been recording a lot recently, I will also have an additional ride cymbal mic because there's a lot of work on the ride cymbal and you want to get that sizzle. So, and then in positioning, personal preference, I prefer to have the drum positioning as I look at the drummer. So if the drummer is right-handed, the hi-hat's on the right-hand side, high tom, mid tom, floor tom, crash, ride, that's how I prefer it. Some air drummers like them the reverse, so they like the hi-hat on that side, so when they're playing along it's the same.
So
it's
me
a personal
personally,
choice.
I because I play the drums, I like to have it from drummer's perspective, but it doesn't really matter.
That's personal choice.
Yeah.
And then discuss with your drummer where you're positioning things. Again, a lot of manufacturers now are making smaller clamps, so you don't need as many stands, so you can get a much tighter setup, which means when the drummer comes in for a toilet break or a cup of tea break, they're not tripping over everything.
Exactly,
Again, a simple thing to remember, don't trip over all the cables. Because even if you're recording at home and you can do a home recording with 3 or 4 mics, there's still a lot of cables on the floor. So we've discussed the drums. If you're cutting the band live, then you need to think about how much spill you want. Even at home, I've cut bands, years ago, I used to cut bands in my flat. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, it was so loud. But you can get a reasonable amount of separation if you want separation. I mean, on the most recent stuff I've been recording where it's this kind of neo-soul jazz vibe, I've intentionally had spill in the room. So when you listen to the overheads, there's a lot of the bass because I've had the amp set to a level where I intentionally wanted the spill. I've had the guitar amp intentionally bleeding across everything. I even, on the Rhodes, which was DI'd, I'd put that through a speaker so it bled into the room so that the drums were picking up a bit of the Rhodes in the room. So that there's this whoosh sound in the room. It sounds fantastic.
Kind of gives you more of that live kind of feel as well.
Well, the tracks were cut live and there's thankfully no editing. But what was really good was you get this additional sonic colour. So, for example, the Rhodes is swirling around DI, lovely captured sound. But in the room, you've got this sort of wash that's picking up on the guitar amp. And the other thing was that the guitar amp was using the guitar, the spring sound in the amp. And that was pinging across the room. It sounded fabulous. Now, obviously it means you can't do any remixes because you can't get rid of everything. But as a picture of the sound, it was excellent.
It gives you a more realistic representation of what the band...
So again, back to our very basic recording. If you're a singer-songwriter and you're just recording guitar and vocal, do you want to record guitar and vocal at the same time to get that feel of a one take? Or do you want to overdub your vocal? Now, the way to do that, here's my trick for singer-songwriters. You'll have to use some form of click. But the way to do it would be to record a guide vocal and guitar first, listen back to that in headphones and then record your guitar cleanly, and then listen back to that and dump the guide track and now do your vocal. That way you can have a singer-songwriter performance where you've got guitar and vocal isolated, if that's what you want. Doing them at the same time, I still think is the best, really. But you might feel that perhaps you wanted to change the performance on the vocal a bit, which you obviously can't do if you've captured both of them, because there'll be spill on both of them.
Because realistically, you want to create or capture the emotion. You want to capture exactly how it makes you feel, as if one person is just playing and singing guitar.
And there are tricks you can do. We've spoken about recording drums. Now with the bass, if you capture the bass DI and something like this, you can go direct in and capture the bass cleanly. That may be not the sound you necessarily want. So another trick you can do is what we call reamping, and you can certainly do it with something like this. So you play back from your DAW the isolated sound, bring it back through the interface and put it through a speaker or an amp and re-mic that and record that as a separate signal. Reamping is the gift that keeps on giving, because honestly, it can really, really change things. I recorded something very recently where the guitarist recorded it DI, but we wanted a very specific sound from my Roland Jazz amp, which is a particular sound. The difference was remarkable, absolutely remarkable, reamping it through. But what gave me the additional advantage of reamping rather than recording it live with the amp was I could move the microphones back, bit more, till I got exactly the sweet spot, which is really difficult to do if the person is there.
Yeah. So realistically, again, it all comes down to thinking out the process, finding out exactly what you want and capturing the source that you need.
Yeah, as a producer, I always say, speak to the artist first, because often the art of record production is communication. Most bands or single artists, they'll come to me with a specific idea. They'll say, this is the song and I'd like it to sound like this. And in most cases, we're all influenced by other things. So bands could be influenced by a particular sound on a particular record. And sometimes it can be really a fine detail and unrelated to the song they're doing. It could be, for example, I really love that snare drum sound or the reverb on that snare, and I love the impact that has on that track. I'd like that sort of signature on my track. Or very recently, actually, I'm working with a band called the Hush Tones, and we're literally finishing the mix. And Mick, the guitarist, said, there's something about the guitar that I'm not 100% happy with, even though we spent quite a long time doing it. The performance was fine. And I said, well, what is it that you are not hearing? He said, can I play you something that I really like the guitar sound on? And he played me a track, and I said, oh, well, that to me sounds like there's actually a 12-string on there. Now, we've played it on a 6-string. And he said, yeah, but I don't want to play it on a 12-string. I said, here's an idea. What if we use a harmonizer to create a 12-string sound? We mixed that back in with the track. He went, oh my God, I love it. And it sounds great. And that's actually on the record. So what we have there is a conversation about a sound that he liked on something else, but in the conversation, we developed a brand new sound that was very specific to that song, that we came about it a different way, but we've now ended up with a completely original guitar tone that sounds absolutely incredible. And perhaps, had we done that at the beginning, we would have not had the result. The result we have is absolutely fabulous, because the guitar performance is perfect, and it's got chorusing on it and amp sound and everything. But in the mix, I've added this 12-string layer by putting an octave above using a harmonizer, and it really, in the mix, it's fantastic.
And it is that experimentation, because if you did just say here's a 12-string, and it just wouldn't have the same.
He would have played it differently as well, because you play a 12-string differently. So, and he said that to me straight away. I didn't imagine this song being played on 12-string, but he liked the kind of tonality of having that octave that you get with a 12-string. Another fabulous trick that an American friend showed me with acoustic guitars about how you, again, for these singer-songwriters, think about the process of what part you're playing. So even if it's a very basic song, break the guitar part down. A lot of Nashville records are done this way, where the performance may be that, but maybe it's not that you want to record. Maybe you want to just record the chords first and then do the rhythm. Or maybe once you've done the rhythm, you want to enhance the downbeats, for example, with a second guitar. A lot of Nashville guitarists use what's called Nashville tuning, where they will have two guitars. One is standard tuning and one is set to the 12-string tuning. And they'll record the two guitars separately, obviously. And that's not the sound of a 12-string, but it's not the sound of two strings. It's a really great sound. Again, that's a trick I did with the Hush Tones, because we're gifted with fabulous musicians. So there's two guitarists in the band, and we did one song where they played the two guitars together, faced like we are, face to face.
Yeah.
And I put the mic in the middle. So it's a fabulous sound. They tried to get the parts as exact as they could, as if they were double tracking.
Yeah.
But not.
Yeah.
And it's a really great sound, you know. So if you are collaborating with other musicians or other players, think about the strengths and weaknesses that you both have, and maybe there's a way that you can combine those to create something really unique.
Yeah, and it's capturing something that nobody else has. It's very unique.
This is the thing. It's trying to be unique when we've all got a million plugins and a million things, but it's how you use them. You can still be absolutely original and absolutely unique with things.
So we've got all of the tracking down. What about the next step? Obviously, the mixing side of things.
Yeah, well, hopefully you've captured everything as you want. Now, I'm a big believer, and this is the way that I was taught, is to record things as you want. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I did used to have to do back in the previous times of analog recording was, you know, as much as I love my AMS reverb, I only had one AMS reverb, so I couldn't put it on a million things. So if I wanted AMS reverb on the snare drum, for example, I would print that on the multi-track track so that I could use the AMS reverb on the vocals. And so consequently, my multi-tracks, my legacy multi-tracks, often have many of the effects recorded as I went. Now, I'm a big believer in that, because even in a digital world with a DAW, if you're recording the effects or having the effects available as you're recording, the singers or the other musicians who may be overdubbing are hearing much closer to a picture that you might imagine for mixing. And it also means that when you come to mixing, you're not starting, as we used to say, faders down and starting with a blank page.
Yeah.
So what I tend to do after I've captured everything is what I call a pre-mix stage. And what that will be is checking things like the drums, for example. Have I had to edit anything? Are there any errors? Are there any glitches? As you know, sometimes perhaps a microphone's moved or something. You know, I had one example, I mentioned the hush tones before, I had one particular example where the under mic had fallen off the stand during the recording, and it meant that was not usable in the mix. So I had to, thankfully, one quick tip there is make sure your drummer gives you a couple of isolated samples of the setup before you move on, because you never know when you need them. The two things you need is a cymbal, clean cymbal, because that can cover up any edit, and an isolated snare drum. So what we ended up doing was, on that particular track, I re-triggered the lower snare with his sample because the microphone was just recording the floor. As he moved out, he'd actually caught it with his foot and it had fallen over, and I didn't notice. So go through the tracks and just do the pre-mix tidying, so cleaning up things like that, going through the vocal track to make sure all the breaths are correct, and then go through and fade the breaths up. When we mentioned my mouse, I also use Stream Deck, the little controller keys. So I have a great feature there on Logic where I go from, in the automation, the straight tool to the curve tool, which is fantastic for breaths. So I can quickly, between the two. So I'll go through all the tracks and make sure they're kind of housekeeping. The tidying is done and everything is in all the right place. And then certainly a trick I like with Logic is to, if I've got like, say, 3 backing vocals, I'll put those in a little folder so that my desktop is cleaner. That just makes navigating easier. It's just an OCD thing, but I just want to have it so it's clean. And then it's the mixing process. And this is the problem that is really confronts people. You've spent all this time recording it, but how do you balance everything? Number one thing is check your levels. Now, if you're mixing in the box, do check the levels, because what often is a big problem, and many of my students that come to me, everything is overdriven. So check the levels, check your output. In the case of products like Logic, you have things called VCA faders available. So you can have, say you're happy with your guitar balance, that's it, but the whole thing is too loud. Make a VCA fader, bring the whole lot down. So you've got your balance as you want it, but now you're bringing the level down. So do check your level. And if you're sending something away to be mastered, or you're mastering it yourself, you need to give yourself, ideally, 4 to 5 dB of headroom, because you cannot master something that's already right at the top. And most records or most home recordings sound bad because it's just overshooting. There is, in the digital world, an absolute. And the absolute is when you're at the top, there is no more. It just sounds horrible and crunchy and ugh.
I remember when I first did my very first band recording, I sent it off somewhere else to get it mastered, and he sent it back to me and he said, "You've put too much compression on this and it's too loud and I can't really do anything." So
exactly.
I had to go back and go, okay, now what do I need to do to get this to, and it was a big learning curve for me, but obviously come quite a bit from there. But
as you've brought the subject of compression up, so compression is your friend and can be your enemy. Yeah. You're absolutely right. Don't put it on your output bus and send it off to be mastered, because the poor mastering engineer cannot do anything with that. However, what you can do to make your mix easier is what we call mix buses. So for example, I would have my drum tracks, which may be kick, snare, toms, overheads, maybe, half a dozen tracks perhaps. Those would be to an output bus. And I might do 2 output buses or even 3. So I might have one for all the cymbals and overheads, which is going to be tinsely and shiny. I probably don't need compression on that, but I probably do need to have a filter on it to get rid of the low rumble. Yeah. The tom-toms, now those I would want some compression on, because if you have the compressor just perfect, the tom resonance really rings through and you can get them to sit very well in the mix. The trick there is you need to make sure that you have a slow attack, because you don't want to clip the front of the tom-tom, and you need a relatively fast release. That's the trick with tom-toms, and not a huge ratio, 4 max maybe, something like that. For those that know compression, the quick education on compression: the threshold, the point at which the compressor kicks in, the ratio, the amount of compression when it kicks in, the attack, how quickly it does what it's doing, and the release, how quickly it lets go what it's doing, and then finally the gain makeup. All the compression will probably reduce the level a little bit, so you push it back up again. That's a 30-second lesson.
There you go. How to compress.
But please learn about compression. It's the most powerful tool. So if you do compression on individual buses, you can control the tonality of your recording without the problem that you've experienced of sending it off and the mastering engineer go, "I can't work with this." But do check the output levels. It's really important. And most software has the ability to take everything down by X, So if you've got your mix and you go, "This is pretty good, but I can see by my output meters, it's really overshooting," you can pull the whole lot down by 3 dB, 5 dB, whatever, to get your mix cleaner. And then you can use some of the phenomenal mastering tools that are available if you don't have a budget to send it off. But one of the reasons I like to give it to a mastering engineer is I like to have their input on the track. They're hearing it with fresh ears. And so sometimes they might be able to say, "You know what, I'm going to just tweak this or change that,"
I feel like with the whole fresh ears thing, you are mixing, you're sitting there, you're going through and through and through. Sometimes you just need those fresh ears to kind of really go, "You know what, this is what you're missing," or "This is what needs."
Absolutely. And the other great trick of always is do your mix on headphones. Listen on headphones, listen to a few individual instruments. Check your reverb on headphones. Then listen on your speakers. Then go and listen in a car or listen on a pair of rubbish speakers. Because you need to hear the balance in different things. I hate to say it, put it on your phone and listen to it on your phone, because the phone will reveal something really sticking out, and compare your phone to something else that you really like and go, "Oh my God, my vocal is horrible compared to that." It's, they're not good examples of hi-fi listening, but they're good examples of how frequencies jump out, and perhaps they're the frequencies you don't want to jump out. So then you can go back to your mix and go, "Oh, on my phone, that was really annoying me. I could pull that down." Because it's much better to do that at the mixing stage than the poor mastering engineer having to try and fix a problem, because it's so much easier to get it right on the mix. So check pre-mixing, get everything ready, and then, I say this so many times, take breaks. Do a mix, sit back, listen to something else, do something else, and come back to it. And how I tend to work with a band, and I've been doing this for many years now, it works really well, is we'll get the mix ready at, say, 6 o'clock, and we'll stop. They'll all take a track home, listen to it overnight in their own environments on whatever system they want, in their car, on their headphones.
Whatever they're used to,
Exactly. Compare notes overnight, and in the morning, we'll make the fixes, and by lunchtime that mix is done, and then we'll start the next one. And we keep that process going. And that way you can mix a track easily in that cycle. Mix, listen, fix, on and so on and so forth. Occasionally there's one that becomes really difficult, and there's a few things that, sometimes if you've got a lot of guitars on a track and you've got a lot of keyboards, they can be taking up very similar areas. And in some cases, even though you may have the best guitar sound ever or the best keyboard sound, sometimes you have to make quite vicious decisions in the mix. And you might have to say, you know what, in order for this to cut through, I'm going to have to take all the low end out of this, or all the top end off. But you'll find a space, and this is certainly true of some of the more modern keyboards. You know, they're very, very wide, dynamic, very, you know, a huge fidelity, something that wasn't available on keyboards before. And in fact, while we're talking keyboards and the mix, think about the panning positions, because a lot of modern keyboards have a stereo output and the sound is kind of stereo, but it's not always stereo. Sometimes it might be a mono sound, but with a reverb or a chorus or something. So listen to it and think, is that a stereo sound? Because if you've got 3 or 4 keyboard tracks and they're all stereo, you're kind of filling that up. Whereas you're what's going on over here or over here? Yeah. Maybe you can mono it or do something different with it to say have the pad there and the rhythm there or the arpeggio, whatever parts you've got. Think about where they sit in the stereo field, because you can actually end up hearing them much better than if they're just all in stereo. And do double check stereo, because oh my God, I get so many mixes where the DAW is just full of stereo tracks and they're all mono. Yeah. And again, quick tip here, if you're working on a laptop and you've got, I don't know, let's call it 50 tracks and they're all stereo, but they're not stereo, your laptop is working twice as hard, because a stereo file doesn't know that it's stereo. Yeah. It's a piece of audio and it's taking up twice as much hard disk space and twice as much resources on the computer. So there's plenty of great little apps out there. I use one called Stereo Monoizer. It just quickly batch listens to all the files and says, these are only mono, and it makes them mono. Yeah. And you can literally make the song go from 3 gig down to 2 gig, plus the resources are better. So do check your stereo mono compatibility. I know it's a big error that people make when they bounce stuff out, particularly on Logic. You have to check when you're bouncing whether you've got the little stereo icon checked, because not everything is stereo. And mono is very, very powerful. So it was another little handy tip there.
Yeah. So realistically, even if you're doing your singer and songwriter or you're doing full bands, every single step is really important to think about it beforehand and be prepared before you go into the situation.
Yes, it's the same way, I guess, that people would make a movie. They would have a script and a storyboard. Yeah. And why we as record producers or music creators, why do we not do the same? Yeah. Having a storyboard or a script is really, really important. It saves time in the recording process and it does make the job better. And you're absolutely right. Whether you're starting with the absolute minimum system of a simple setup like this through to full band recording, the rules are the same. You want a great product at the end of it. You want a great song that sounds perfect in the way you want it to sound perfect, because obviously some people want lo-fi, some people want hi-fi. Whatever you want it to sound like, you need to deliver that. So trying to think the process through and really, really make sure you're doing the best you possibly can at every stage.
Exactly. Cool. So thank you so much, Steve, for going through all of this information with us. I mean, you're such a wealth of knowledge and it's been such a great time.
Well, thank you. And hopefully our viewers have found some elements of it very useful.
I'm definitely sure they have. If you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like this in the future, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that bell. As for me, my name is Rick. This is Steve. Thanks again.
My absolute pleasure.
See you next time.